It's from our friend Brian Doyle, Book of Uncommon Prayer. Muttered prayer in thanks for the under genius of Christmas, he calls this. Muttered prayer in thanks for the under genius of Christmas. So just use your short-term memory and think about last month. He writes, putting up ye old fir tree last night and pondering why again we slay a perfectly healthy tree, 10 years of age, not even a teenager yet, and prop up the body and drape it with frippery, and then finally feed the brittle former vibrancy into a chipper, paying a grim Boy Scout $5 for the privilege. I watched my bride and children quietly for a while from behind the tree where I was struggling with that haunted, cursed string of lights, and I saw the under genius of it all. I saw beneath the tinsel and nog the snarl of commerce and the ocean of misspent money. I saw the quiet pleasure of ritual, the actual, no kidding, no fooling urge to pause and think about other people and their joy. The anticipation of days spent laughing and shouldering in the kitchen with no agenda and no press of duty. I saw the flash of peace and love under all the shrill selling and tinny theater, and I was thrilled and moved. And then I remembered too, that the ostensible reason for it all was the love being bold and brave enough to assume a form that would bleed and break and despair and die. And I was again moved and abashed, and I finished untangling the epic knot of lights, shivering yet again with happiness that we were given such a sweet, terrible knot of a world to untangle as best we can with bumbling love. And so, amen. He has a different prayer style. Some of you know, some of you are new, and maybe aren't familiar with him. Very stream of consciousness, but I think a real genius to him. So, last time review. Oh, we got to really remember. We read Luke 16, the parable of the dishonest manager. Remember? Or the shrewd or prudent manager, I think we said, or the clever oikonomon, or the household steward. We wondered if he was a trickster, or if he was a clever salesman, right? Or some kind of rogue. Why would his boss ever commend him, right? And what was the moral of the story? Those are all some things that we talked about. And like the prodigal, we kind of ended on a cliffhanger because we don't really know how the story turned out, what happened to the man. So if you thought we were twisted in knots then, you have to get ready for today because we're moving on. We've got fewer parables in Matthew, and he tends to clump them together. So one such clump that we're going to read today probably actually starts the chapter before, and it's like one long section. We're going to read from Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16. Matthew 20, 1 through 16. And I'm looking at my notes here. I've got the rest of the study planned out. We've got about 3 more weeks after today. So that'll put us January 18th, 25th, February 1st, I think we'll end. We're probably going to read a good bit of Matthew, but some of our parables that you had voted on show up in all 3. So I'm going to try to like move us around a little bit, but we're going to get used to Matthew style today. Matthew chapter 20, 1 through 16. Do we have anyone willing to read? And again, we can always split this up into half and half. This is the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. At least that's what my Bible's title is. You may have something else, and I'll ask you after we're done reading what yours says. So
I'll do it.
Okay, thank you, Debbie.
For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius for the day, he sent them into his vineyard. And when he went out about the 3rd hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and to those he said, "You too go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you." And so they went. Again he went out about the 6th and the 9th hour and did the same thing. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day long? They said to him, because no one hired us. He said to them, you too go into the vineyard. And when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last fruit to the first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. And when those hired first came, they thought that they would receive more. And they also received each one a denarius. And when they received it, they grumbled at the landowner, saying, these last men have worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden and the scorching heat of the day. But he answered and said to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way, but I wish to give to this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own? Or is your eye envious because I am generous? Thus the last shall be first and the first shall be last.
We just talked about the eye. That's good. We're gonna talk about that later. So I mentioned to you, this is part of a greater like section that actually begins verse 16 of chapter 19. So depending on how your pages are, it might even be on the same page as when the parable in chapter 20 starts. You'll see that they're starting to talk about, and the rich young man and the ruler, you know, kind of like comes and says, you know, what must I do? So they're starting to talk about the eye of camel through the eye of the needle, da 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 da. And this is in that same stretch of teaching. Now whether it's the same day, I don't know, but it's like I said, Matthew clumps things together, so it certainly appears that way. So the heading of this parable, like I said, I have laborers in the vineyard. What do you all have? What's this called?
I have the last shall be first.
Wow. The title of yours is The Last Shall Be First.
A story about workers.
A story about workers. That is about as unbiased as possible, right? Anything else?
Fine, just the workers in the vineyard.
Workers in the vineyard, okay. So like I mentioned, the setting of the parable, if you kind of look, if it's clumped together with chapter 19, Jesus comments about how hard it is to get into heaven. Peter kind of musing about, well, we've done everything you've asked. Jesus' response is, this last shall be first shall be last. If you look at verse 30 of chapter 19, do you see that? So that's I think interesting, and you know, so the context kind of matters. So who was Jesus talking to directly in this passage? Can you tell? I think so. Seems to be, you know, someone comes and you know, Jesus says all these things. Then, and I think it's 19:23, chapter 19, verse 23. Then Jesus says to his disciples, right? And then Peter has this response. So if that, again, it's all contiguous, I think that's a good inference. There may be other people listening too. I guess we don't really know because somebody had asked the question from the crowd. So who are the characters in the parable itself? Got a landowner.
And all the day workers.
Yep, all the day laborers. Is there anybody else? I don't think so. Kind of.
Who's a bailiff? Oh, there's a foreman.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, because he's the one who's actually doling out the manager.
Yes, there's a manager. There's an oikonomon. Oh, yes. Okay, so do the day labor economy in general, does it still exist?
Yeah.
Absolutely, it does. Have you ever participated in that? Whether as an employee or the one doing the hiring? When I think about growing up in Illinois, it was a rite of passage to detassel corn.
And bonding. That's what our daughter mother
What?
Sugar beets.
Oh, really? Is that what you did? Did you do that for, no kidding?
Our history teacher was the foreman, if you want to call it.
Yeah,
Wasn't it fun?
no. Did you go out early in the morning like the detasselers did?
Passed out in between the rows.
Oh, gee, this is not for you.
We
Mhm.
did it one summer.
Seems like some of these jobs, everybody does them once.
Yes.
There may not be a repeat. Okay, so is it formal or informal? Kind of informal, right? I mean, the contract might be like even verbal sometimes. I think now they do have to do like releases and stuff, but I don't think we did back then. You know, it's just kind of like, who are you? What's your name? Okay. And so what are some of the other characteristics? Let's see, it would be like sort of informal, and then would you say on the contractor's end too? You couldn't necessarily rely on that as a regular, like it's infrequent. There's a tendency that it might be limited, correct? Whether it's your own body being limited by what you can and can't do, or if it's just, you know, the work itself is seasonal. There's other contract work that isn't manual labor, right? It seems like there's more and more of it now.
And the computer workers.
Computer work.
Mhm.
I think about even traveling nurses.
Yeah.
So what's desirable about contract work from the employee's perspective? Why would somebody want to do that instead of work regular hours, regular commitments?
No withholding.
No withholding. So there might be a tax advantage or temporarily more money in pocket, right? Travel, variety, interest.
It ends.
Yeah. Flexibility, right? So like you might say, I don't want to work all the time the whole part of the year. Maybe I just only want to work this part. More control maybe. How about from an employer's perspective? What is desirable about contract or day labor work?
Well, if you don't need anybody on a consistent basis, it's economically much better to hire them here, there.
Right, right. So there's flexibility on the employer's part too, right? And financially, there's an advantage sometimes there too. Okay, so now what's undesirable about contract work from the employee's perspective and the employer's?
Probably not the
There's
benefits.
usually no benefits.
No benefits, right?
And generally, the employee doesn't have a say in how much he gets paid. Sometimes they can negotiate, but a lot of times the employer says.
This is the rate and
"This
take it
is
or
the
leave
rate,
it.
Take it or leave it.
Yep,
If you don't want it, somebody else will.
yep. What else?
Yeah, when
Jen?
I graduated my school, Wilson Meatpacking was on strike, and so we came over to Orville. And there was lines of about 600-700 people, and every day you'd go over there, they came out and said, we're taking 5, we're taking 30.
Yeah,
And so you thought, well, we'll just stay overnight. They say you can't stay on our property overnight. And the police wouldn't let you be downtown, so you had to go home all the time. So the Army beckoned because I knew I'd have a steady job.
Yeah.
And they took care of all the benefits, and I still got paid, and I
Sure.
eventually got in a job that I liked and made it worthwhile, but.
right. So the flexibility has a shadow side, which is it's not dependability, right? You can't rely on it. And it doesn't really have a classification, right? There's no, it's not like day laborers organize together and say these are unfair labor practices, right?
I went and caught a bus one day before that, and weeded onions and out in Hollandale, that was the last day of work. Yeah,
Wow.
And there's
Wow.
not, oftentimes, unless it's a long-term contract, you're not part of the community, right?
Yeah.
You know, I worked for a company that hired contract workers, and they were always kind of left out,
Yeah, right,
I mean, and some of them we knew really well, because they worked for us a lot, off and on, but
right.
they weren't part of, like, they didn't get invited to the Christmas party, they didn't,
Right.
all that kind of stuff.
Right,
You weren't
right.
part of that, you were kind of on the fringes all the time.
On the fringe. And like, of course, some people again like that. Other people say, there's this emotional piece to work or this emotional loyalty to the team, and that's kind of missing, or it's certainly interrupted in those situations because not everybody's classified quite the same way. And I also was thinking another detriment, and I don't know if you've thought about this, but I think about like traveling nurses, for example, can also be disruptive to those in the settled professions, right? Because they know the nurse who's working next to them is getting into it, right? So there's that too. Anyhow, these are all things I'm thinking about as I think about this parable, because everything old is new again. Okay, so we've talked about the setting, we've kind of talked about day labor economy a little bit and the pluses and minuses. So now let's kind of get into it a little bit. Let's see what I have on my notes. So what is the surprise or shock or scandal in this parable? You know, there is always a twist. So what's the twist here?
Everybody gets paid the same.
So, and it depends on who you identify with, how you feel about that, right? But I'm guessing do you have an emotional reaction to this story? What is it?
It's unfair.
And I suppose that's because we all put ourselves in we were at work at 6 o'clock in the morning.
They all got what they were promised.
So then, you know, that if you're an early worker, or anyone, you know, who has been told they didn't deserve their compensation, right? Or their inheritance, or, you know, whatever, there's reactions to those kinds of things. Okay, so from the beginning since the Bible was written down, this is a parable that interpreters kind of struggle to make sense of. In fact, the original parable may have even ended about verse 13 or 14. There are clues that about 14b through 16 are some things Matthew sort of like tucked in. It's possible, we don't know, because all of scripture is, kind of pieced together. So this is based on like translations and how reliable different manuscripts were, and so I leave that to the scholars, but I thought I'd just mention that to you because I find it interesting. But the setup is the day laborers are hired at sunup and they're paid at the end of the day. The coin has a name. What is it? Denarius. Yep, or denarius. This is Torah regulations and a common Jewish practice to do it this way. Leviticus 19, Deuteronomy 24 talks about how to do this. The denarius literally means the daily wage or the minimum wage or the subsistence wage. Okay, that's what this is. But there are some really unusual features to this story. So, for example, why does the owner do his own hiring? I mean, we talked about managers last time, and there's even one here, but he stays home. That's weird. Why does the owner go out? And why does the owner go out repeatedly? Why would a landowner go out that many times?
He's greedy, wants the labor from the people as much as he can, and he doesn't trust maybe the underlings that are supposed to be supervised.
Right, we don't really know, but I mean, it's a lot of work on his part.
Well,
wants
the
to get as
foreman is
many people
already
as
out in the
possible.
field, making sure all the laborers out there working. He can't keep running back to the marketplace, because that's where all the workers are.
Yeah.
So he expects the foreman to be on,
Yeah.
there out in the field, making sure those
Yeah.
people work.
And it's an oral contract they have.
Hands-on.
Yeah, so he makes his own contract.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with a hands-on supervisor,
I mean, he could hire 2 managers, but he's
and he'd lose money.
he wouldn't do anything himself, or wouldn't have anything to do.
I love it. So they, they first agreed to the first group agreed to the normal expected amount, right? Verse 4 is the second group. What did they agree to?
What is
it? Yeah,
What
doesn't
is
it?
that?
He doesn't say how much he doesn't say. And then let's see, is it
They also received the usual daily
Yeah.
wages, the last group.
yeah. So whatever is right is dikaios, I think, and it's the same word that kind of where righteousness comes from. So the first group has this verbal contract. The second group just like kind of has to trust the master's sense of justice. But really all the groups work on the present premise, right? That the owner is trustworthy and is going to honor their commitment, right? So the landowner, verse 8, I think it is, the landowner gets called something. See, something verse 8. I'll look at my stuff. Oh, mine doesn't have this. never mind. There's a version of the scripture that talks about, calls them Lord. And he does this strange form of payment. How does he choose to pay them?
Well.
He's the last person.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
There never would have been a controversy if he had paid the first people
They would have
first.
gone and
They would have gone, they would have never known that these people only worked 3 hours. Anyway, so why did he do it that way?
do you remember the setup in 1930? What does it say in chapter 19, verse 30? And it says it again in this end of this one.
The first shall be last and the last shall be first.
So it makes sense when you put it in context, but people don't. It really irks people, I guess. Okay. So, verse 11, what is, now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the daily usual wage. And when they received it, what did they do? They grumbled against the landowner. And gogizon is the word in Greek, and it's kind of an uncertain origin word because it's like onomatopoeic. It sounds like the word, but it is grumbling. And it could be murmur, complaint, whatever. The same word is used in John chapter 6 and 7 when Jesus is teaching about the bread of life. And they hate that idea. The people he's talking to are like, this is hard teaching, who can accept it? And they grumble. And in 1 Corinthians, when Paul is referencing the Israelites, he uses the same word for grumble. Okay, so notice in verse 12, and I think we have to be really clear here. What is the objection?
We're made equal to them.
That's the objection. It's not that the contract is broken or unfulfilled. It's that others are made equal or identical. Isos is the word in Greek, E-E-S-O-S. Or isos is another form of that, same as isosceles triangle, it's the same root word. Equality is the complaint. So is their complaint legitimate?
When you go up, they were in the heat all day. You can understand. Do you think this is a little cynical view of salaried workers, but salaried workers are hired, they have the same, and they can work as much as they want or as little as they want. And so hence the issues at the workplace.
There are conventions to our work and its power structure and the expectations. So this is reversing convention. I would say then, right? Their convention. And we also have no problem seeing it as a reversal of our convention too, right? So verse 13, the conversation begins. He replies to one of them, and what does he call that one? Does everybody have friend? Friend. Might be used ironically. Because the word is hitari, it means like, it's closer to Mr., if that makes sense. Okay. So it's like there's some distance in the word. So so I say it might be used ironically. It's not friend, like friendly friend. It's like friend, like generic title for someone I don't know very well. And we use friend ironically too, I think sometimes. I did you no wrong. Or I'm doing you no wrong. What do you have?
I have not cheated you.
I've not cheated you.
Unfair.
I've not been unfair.
I have not been.
Adikaios is the word. If you remember, I will pay you what is right is dikaios. I have not been a dikaios. I've not been unrighteous or not right. Verse 14. Take what belongs to you and go. Then I choose to give. Do you have that or something along that?
I choose to pay.
I choose, or I wanted to. I desire. Okay, so the Greek word there is wish or desire or purpose. Hey, I get to do what I want to do, kind of a thing. And then verse 15 actually has two rhetorical questions in it. So what's the first one?
My money? I can do what I want, it's not illegal.
Right.
Against the law.
Right, am I not allowed to do what I want with what is mine, or something similar, the ban, so why might the landowner basically say it's none of your business?
Because it's not.
Mine says, should you be angry because I am kind?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the next like rhetorical question, right? So kind of defining that first one. But there's an inversion of the status quo, right? And so the objection, at least for, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Technically, absolutely. You can do whatever you want with what belongs to you, right? So it's the inversion of the status quo. And the objection is like an objection to a powerful person who is freely choosing equality. Don't like it. And then the next one is about kindness. You had, when Debbie read, did you notice her said I? About envy?
Your eye is envious.
Yes, which is so cool because that word does mean that. And envious is poneros. It's like the word that goes along with something evil. It's like trouble or wicked or being a pain. Or are you envious because I'm generous or kind or good? Agathos is the word. It means good. It can also mean generous. And it's the same word that's used in 1917. So that's the rich young man who comes. And he said to him, why do you ask me about what is good? There is only one who is good. Same word comes up in the parable, the next chapter. So do you notice the laborer's reaction is not cast as anger or hatred? What is it cast as?
Envy.
Envy.
That's, I mean, we see an athlete getting paid this ridiculous amount of money
Mhm.
for playing a game. It makes you mad, but if you are a little envious, you're like, how come you don't have to work for a living? I don't get paid, it's kind of common for us, I think. I could have sat in the park all day and I got a denarius instead of working all day. Got a denarius.
Yep. Other reactions to it? Does this one really irk you?
I'm not sure how I relate this business of the first or the last shall be first and first shall be last to this economic
Yeah.
situation. I don't.
To
It's
me,
almost
the
like they're talking about two different things.
Well, to me, the exegetical key is that first rhetorical question, which is, don't I get to do what I want? And this is what I want to do. Which is like really irritating to those of us who like to be the son of workers.
My footnote says that it's really about, he's saying to the Jewish people who thought they would be first because they had the covenant since Abraham's time
Mhm.
and all this
Mhm.
time has passed. And now these pagans and sinners and Gentiles are gonna come.
Who
for-
don't keep laws and really don't work
and
very
don't- and
hard at
didn't
their
do anything
faith.
for centuries and don't keep the bloodlines pure, et cetera, et cetera. Those people get in too. They get,
What kind of a God is this? These standards are so low.
yeah.
And aren't we judgmental?
I think we're catching on.
Well, I wondered, he's talking to the disciples, and earlier in 19, even Peter's questions him a little bit. What are the disciples thinking? They were the very first, and
Yes.
all of a sudden they're gonna be way at the tail end. That doesn't seem fair either.
Or you could save the best for last.
What?
You could save the best for last.
So he's saying, look out for the Gentiles.
I think there's all kinds of
No,
implications
he's
here,
accepting.
right? And
Well,
so,
he's telling that they should be for them because they're gonna be first.
They're gonna be
Well, they're
first.
gonna be part of the kingdom too.
They're gonna be part of the kingdom. They're gonna be there.
just even the fact that they get the same wage is irritating, right? So, I think that's, so parables, as you remember, are meant to open us up. I can't say, yes, it's this, or no, it's not. I mean, I think yes to all. Yes to all interpretations of what this means, right? When convention gets upended. Last shall be first, first shall be last sounds very comforting. Unless you secretly have built your whole life around being first.
Yes.
Wasn't
It is
there
our
a movie
society.
one time about some horrible murderer, and right before he died, he was
Born again.
born again? He got into heaven. I mean.
There you
Well, we think he did. We don't know. That's true. You don't know until it's you right there at the end. You don't know if you're making it or not.
And
You have no one to tell.
Exactly.
And it's really, so, to put it out, to lay aside our human achievement and our emotional reactions to it for a second, and just look at the theology that's in the parable, or at least what I see as the theology that Jesus is bringing up, which I think is a really important point, is, are you envious because I'm generous? Why are you mad because I'm good?
Maybe we don't like good people that much.
We like fairness more.
So it exposes, right? Parables expose this secret, like I said, kind of secret achievement mentality that we really love here in the United States of America, right? And I mean, it's everywhere, it's prevalent everywhere, but I would say that, like, secretly, I mean, I think we like a meritocracy. It's comforting to us because we feel like we have been in some control.
Well, and we work for what we get.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's why people have so much trouble with welfare and those kinds of things, but they're not working to get that.
Entitlement, yeah.
So
Well,
Jesus
it
is
is-
the great disruptor.
I think so. The original. Yes, the original, yeah.
When I lived in Russia, it was right after communism fell. And so there was a lot of people that were becoming Christians that had never had the opportunity to do that before. And the persecuted Christians that were Christians during the whole communist regime were just livid. And they would, so far, you're not Christians, we are, because we were persecuted.
Yeah.
And you're not, because you just came in when it was okay.
When it was
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a big deal.
It's a
Really
big,
Was that the
Deal.
fight between Augustine and the Manichaeans?
yes, it was a fight throughout the whole church. We, if you really want to tear people down, just tell them they're not very hard workers and they had it easier than you.
Yeah.
Oh.
Is that not the origin of, I stayed up late and watched Colbert last night. What we do when we pit people against each other and say, you're this and you're that. You've done unpack 38 years of trauma, write a book about it, right?
Yep.
It's interesting to say the least. So the landowner, do you think we need to repent of, or let's put it this way, not we, I won't say we. Do you think the group that was the early group, perhaps there's an expression that they need to repent of their entitlement because they're more worried about what others get than what they get? And why is that?
Well, they need to at least justify it in their mind.
No, it's a different economy. We talked about the economy of grace before, and it's a parable.
It is a parable. But I hear conversation now. I don't think we talk about it here. You're of a different generation. But I hear among people younger than me, absolutely talk about universal basic income. So that everybody, everybody's needs are met. And then beyond that, you go from there. I don't know that it will ever have hold because meritocracy has a big death grip on us, right? But there are cultures and economies that are talking about that as a way to solve poverty and injustice.
How far left do you have to be for that?
Well, it's this idea of a denarius, right? You get a denarius
You're enough for your daily.
because it's more expensive to try to mitigate the problems that come when you don't, right? So in the long run, it often, I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not saying it'll take hold, but that is one philosophy. Instead of doing things the way we do them now, just do it
Isn't there a city in California that's trying that?
I don't know, maybe.
I think it's a black mayor and he's like giving a certain level of income, $2,000 a month. I mean, he's trying to do better than the city.
Yeah.
For nothing, they just,
Right.
to bring everybody up more equal. Can't remember, it's like up around San Jose somewhere.
So, what is helpful about thinking about our Christian service as day laborers, right? I think about like, well, every day is new. We don't own the vineyard we work in. There are seasons to our service, and it's not about what we get. Would you say?
I'm thinking this is the whole point of evangelism. That's the way I read this.
Okay,
That we keep working, and the workers, we keep working, and if they come later, that's great.
that's
We're
what a
trying to
what a
get- We're trying to, you can get baptized when you're 98 years old, can't you?
She wasn't a serial killer before.
It'd still be okay if she was serial killer.
We're trying as hard as we can to get people to come here.
yeah. I like
We're
it.
working on it all the time, aren't we? I say, isn't it great to come to Bible study? Aren't you glad you came?
Oh. It's true, I think, and but it has real implications, and we have to unpack our feelings and our enviousness and our right motivation and what our motivation is. I think I really like this parable for that reason. I feel like it really, for somebody who liked to be, has lots of little achievements on the wall. It's good for me to think about these things this way.
I have a real fairness issue that I've dealt with all my whole life. I've noticed that I've run into, like, that's just unfair. In my work life, I really had, and I was in a position that I knew everybody's salary and I would, and most of the time my company was fair, but there was a couple times I would,
Yeah.
and I would notice that I would like, if we were in a meeting, I'd want to point it, a person really isn't contributing enough. But I wouldn't, I mean, I wasn't allowed to say
Yeah.
anything, but I noticed my whole mindset would change toward that person, that they better be working their butt off because they're making a lot of money.
And that's kind of interesting too. So like, it's hard information to have because you don't really have the power to change that. And like we were talking about earlier, maybe one of the keys is like, let's just like boundaries, like, let's just worry about our own little thing. That's really hard for us. We really want to worry about your thing.
Yes, it's true, you do.
Or, you have to deserve that,
Yeah.
I'm thankful for what I.
According to my criteria, you
Yes,
have to deserve that.
It's always been, even how people are treated, like athletes and teachers or nurses, or, you're like, a nurse has to fight for every penny, and an athlete doesn't have to do that at all. I mean, they have somebody they pay to do that.
I was telling my kids about when I was in high school, I had to take a speech class, and we like a rhetoric class, I think. So we had to do some arguing, you know what I mean, and try like mock trial kind of stuff, and on controversial topics. And this would have been in like very early 90s, 89, 90, somewhere in there. And the topic was salary caps for sports players that time. And my teacher was very clever because she made us argue the opposite of how we felt about it, right? So I had to argue that they should get paid whatever they want, whatever the market can bear. And I remember the person I was arguing against was kind of like, oh crap, when I said this, but it was the only thing I could come up with. And I still believe this today. It made me look at it from a different perspective, especially because we were talking about it around this last week with Damar Hamlin's injury. I said, the only point that stuck, because it's sort of indefensible, but I remember the only point that stuck was these players sacrifice their life and bodies and well-being for the sport. So it's basically like giving them a cash payout for like the insurance for an accident ahead of time. Because many of them end up with lifelong, detrimental injuries and life-limiting injuries. And so I've always thought about that when I've thought about that too, you know, because a lot of money is made around them. But for those actual players, I mean, how do you put a price tag on having dementia at age 45? You know what I mean? It's a really exploitative system.
But,
Very-
but how is 200 million from baseball player? I mean, what kind of?
My kids are
injury?
excited about that. They don't care about the money. They just want to go see the Twins
Well, I
do
know.
good this year.
I'm glad that they, you know, but it's like Dave said, you know, he tried to get a better deal someplace else and nobody else would go anywhere near it. And so here he is,
Yep,
you know,
here he
take
is.
what you get, you know, but, yeah,
I know.
I don't think anybody is worth that amount of money.
200 million for Korea, they signed in yesterday.
Yeah.
Pending is
That's what she
physical.
said.
Go-
Yeah.
Did you have a point to make? Steve?
6 years, 200 million for 6 years.
Think of all the
Over
good,
6.
think of all the good he does. He's built,
Back when I
he's
was
built
in the working
schools
world,
and stuff
when
like
I was
that,
a CNA,
and down in the islands.
it was hard.
And I give him credit for
There
that.
was garbage trucks out of the landfill,
Mm.
and I looked at that ad, and it was so much more than I was making. I asked my supervisor, how come you can get so much for part of the garbage trucks coming in counting? She said, welcome to the nursing field. That's just the way it was. But I'm glad I did what I did, not part-time, you know, haul garbage truck.
Yeah, but I mean, it brings up a point, right, about what we value. And you know, somebody said, is anyone worth 200 million? And I'm thinking, you know, I'm thinking about just Jesus and putting it in spiritual terms. I think Jesus would go, well, yeah, you're worth, I mean, each of you are worth
We
that.
all.
Well, but we
all-
don't all get paid 200
No.
million. I mean, you know, that's the thing. I mean, it's.
No. I look at all, you know, and maybe I'm just very cynical, but I look at a lot of that stuff. I mean, for example, I was thinking this last night as I was watching poor Prince Harry, going, you know, we all just have basic human needs, and like more status, more power, more money, more, it makes it worse. It is a trap. Right?
Yeah.
It's a trap.
Yeah.
So anyhow, okay, well, I think we're at about time. I do want to read to you a rabbinic parable I found, which kind of made me smile. So I don't know the source of this, but I know the author who used it, which was John Claypool. There's an old rabbinic parable about a farmer that had 2 sons. As soon as they were old enough to walk, he took them to the fields and taught them everything that he knew about growing crops and raising animals. When he got too old to work, the 2 boys took over the chores of the farm. And when the father died, they had found their working together so meaningful, they decided to keep their partnership. So each brother contributed what he could. During every harvest season, they would divide equally what they had corporately produced. Across the years, the elder brother never married, staying an old bachelor. The younger brother did marry and had 8 wonderful children. Some years later, when they were having a harvest, the old bachelor brother thought to himself one night, my brother has 10 mouths to feed. I only have 1. He really needs more of his harvest than I do, but I know he is much too fair to renegotiate. I know what I'll do. In the dead of the night, when he is already asleep, I'll take some of what I put in my barn and I'll slip it over to his barn to help him feed his children. At the very time he was thinking down that line, the younger brother was thinking to himself, God has given me these wonderful children. My brother hasn't been so fortunate. He really needs more of this harvest for his old age than I do, but I know him. He's much too fair. He'll never renegotiate. I know what I'll do. In the dead of night when he's asleep, I'll take some of what I put in my barn and slip it over to his barn. And so one night when the moon was full, as you may have already anticipated, the 2 brothers came face to face, each on a mission of generosity. The old rabbi said there wasn't a cloud in the sky, but a gentle rain began to fall. You know what it was? God weeping for joy because 2 of his children had gotten the point. 2 of his children had come to realize that generosity is the deepest characteristic of the holy. And because we are made in God's image, Our being generous is the secret to our joy as well. Life is not fair. Thank God.
That's also a point about the people that were the last in the park. Why were they the last in the park? Why were they not picked earlier? Was there something maybe
Right.
disabled about them? or,
Correct.
You know, and that would choose, I mean, like how people look at welfare recipients. There's
Absolutely.
usually generational reasons that. that
And
they are-
so then there's issues of capacity too, right, in the person.
Yeah, and we actually are all just a couple steps from there, when you really look at it. And one mishap or another, and you know, how some people's lives are so much more difficult than mine or whatever. And so it's, you always do have to look at, like, he was generous giving them for an hour's work the same, but maybe that was, we're not privy to all the, why they were the last ones in the park without work. You know,
But our job is to be the recipient, not the, you know what I mean? Like spiritually speaking, like,
and I used to drive by one of those, like day labor kind of places, and it was something, it was really quite sad to see them standing out there. You know, it's like they, for whatever reasons they were there, I don't know what the reason, but it's, you know, it's kind of a badge of shame that they had to wear every day to stand out there, and maybe somebody will fire me today.
Maybe you were jealous of.
No,
You didn't have no responsibility.
no, I wasn't jealous.
all right, let's regroup next week. Stay and have a bite to eat if you want. January 18th, our topic will be the parable of the wicked tenants, which is Matthew 21. And it's also in Mark 12, I think, and Luke chapter 20. That will be our next parable. Thank you, everybody.